adventures and the big things. So thank you. Well, again, thank you for being here today. I want to ask, is there anybody here besides me who has ever said or done something, or maybe you hit send on a text or an email, and you regretted it, and you wish you could take it back? Oh, a few others have too. Wow, that's. I have this waking nightmare that I've just died, and that's not the bad part. But I've died, and Amy and my kids they're sitting around, they're planning the funeral, they're looking at pictures and talking about me, and they're saying stuff like, "Oh, remember the time Dad did that?" Oh yeah, but what about when he did that? That's the biggest fear. I don't fear the dying part. It's that I can't give my side of the story anymore. I mean, that's the hard part of that. But whenever that happens, whenever you find yourself, you've said you've done some really boneheaded thing, and you do sort of the after action analysis to try to break down. Okay, why did I say or do that? I wonder if this acronym doesn't sometimes apply. The HALT, were you hungry, angry, lonely, and or tired at the time, right? And besides just the after-action analysis, it's really important to kind of, when you find yourself, when you are one of these things, you're some combination, you're hungry, you're angry, you're lonely, or you're tired, let that be like a fire alarm that says, watch out, okay? Be very careful with what you're gonna say and do here. Well, this morning, I want to do kind of an after-action analysis of one man's really bad decision, and then contrast that with a really good, in a tense moment decision made by his nephew some years later. Last week, we were looking at an incident in the life of the patriarch Isaac, whose name I consistently misspelled on the screen. Yes, I know. Today I want to look, though, at Isaac's sons, his twin sons, Jacob, Jacob, and Esau, who I'm not going to try to spell. But Jacob and Esau, twins, two brothers, born at the same time, same parents, but two very, very different outlooks and approaches to life. I'm in Genesis chapter 25, and in Genesis 25 here, we find that, it says that Isaac married Rebekah, who was 40 years old when he married her, but for 20 years they didn't have kids. And then it says that Isaac prayed to the Lord, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. And here's some of what it says about that. I'm in verse 22 of Genesis 25. It says, those babies jostled each other within her, and she said, why is this happening to me? So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And so when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first came out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, and so he was named Jacob, which means something like grabbing at the heel. But here's the part I really want to zone in on, just a line beyond that. Verse 27. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man, staying among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Isaac came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, quick, let me have some of that stew, I'm famished. That is why he's also called Edom. Jacob replied, first, sell me your birthright. Look, I'm about to die, Esau said. What good is the birthright to me? But Jacob said, swear to me first. So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some of the lentil stew. He ate and he drank and he got up and he left. And so Esau despised his birthright. I came across a story, a legend about a bandit from the late 1800s named Jorge Mendez, and he kind of did rampages from Mexico on into the Texas territories, and he amassed quite a fortune in gold, and it was sort of like a local legend. And one day, though, the U.S. Marshals caught up with him in a little town in Texas, in some bar in this little town where he had kind of tried to settle incognito. And the marshals said to him, "Mendez, you tell us where the gold is, and we'll go easier on you." And he just kind of looked at them blank. And so one of the patrons of the bar said to him, "Well, sir, Mr. Mendez does not speak English. Would you like me to translate?" And so he did. He said, "Yes, you do that. You tell him. He needs to tell us where the gold is within 1 minute, or we shoot him where he stands." And so he translated this to Mendez, and Mendez very excitedly, repeated back in Spanish, said, okay, don't shoot. The gold, it's buried under the rock that's about 2 feet behind the well at the end of the town, which when translated back to the marshals became, "Mr. Mendez is a very brave man. He says, go ahead and shoot him." That translator reminds me of Jacob, a very shrewd guy who kind of knows how to get what he wants. If I were the one writing up this incident in Genesis 25, I would write it to try to highlight Jacob's shadiness, his just shrewdness of character, how he's just a wheeler dealer kind of a guy. But the writer, who we think is Moses, that wasn't really his emphasis, is it? Now, what he wrote, he wanted to emphasize here that it's about Esau's foolishness. Again, look at that last line again. So Esau despised his birthright. What's the birthright? Well, the birthright went to the firstborn son. Even with twins, one comes out first. I have twin boys. Joe came out a minute before Ben. He's the older. And so the firstborn, what they would get, they got the mantle of family leadership was part of this, and the biggest share of the inheritance, which he could then pass on to his kids as well. And so by any stretch, this birthright, it's a really, really valuable thing. And you remember our HALT acronym, right? Well, Esau has at least the H and the T going for him here, right? He's hungry and he's tired. And if his hunting hasn't gone real well, he's probably a little angry too, right? He catches this whiff then of the soup or the stew here, and think about that. He gets a whiff of this lentil stew, which is kind of like this soupy thing. What's the best soup you've ever had? Think about that. The best soup you've ever had. For me, it's a tie, I think, between the Susan McConnell's chicken noodle that we have here in Ash Wednesday. That's a good one, That and French onion soup, Those are both really good. Actually, what breaks the tie really is the price, right? The Ash Wednesday soup's free, and you get 2 bowls of it. That's really good. But think about the best soup you've ever had. What would you pay for it? What would you pay for a bowl of really good soup? $4, $5, maybe $7 or $8 if it's really, really big bowl, But surely you wouldn't pay anything more than that, because no matter how good it is, it's just soup, right? It's just soup. And I bet Jacob made a really, really good soup, but it's still just soup. And before Esau takes the first bite, he tells him what the bill's going to be, right? It's going to be the birthright, the deed to the family farm, and the family's leadership. A really, really foolish trade, right? But you know what, friends? Esau's trade is made every day. Every day there's somebody who trades the treasure of a marriage for an affair, right? Who trades a promising career for just a moment of embezzling or just laziness. Or trades a friendship for an addiction to something that's killing them. And do you ever find yourself you just want to shake or slap somebody, or somebody shake or slap you and say, wake up, this is foolish. You're trading something incredibly valuable for something that's really not that valuable. Well, how can we avoid Esau's folly here? Well, I already mentioned the HALT test, right? Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? Or some combination of those things. If that's the case, you might want to take a step back. Even though if there aren't any of those factors in play, taking a step back and being a little more patient, right? Being patient. Once Jacob put that choice to him, Esau had to decide quickly. But think about, why was he in such a hurry in the first place? I mean, if he walked a little bit further, somebody probably would have fed him something, right? I mean, his mom would have been there, even though it says his dad really loved him. His mom loved him too. She'd have fed him something, right? There's a restaurant that has a sign on the wall. It says, if you're not served within 5 minutes, well, it'll be 8 or 9, maybe 12. So just relax. Just relax, Well, that's honest, right? That's honest. It also tells us something about the way a lot of us live, and that is in a hurry. In a hurry. This was me a couple of weeks ago. I'm in a hospital. I'm getting on an elevator, and it's kind of late. I'm the only one there, and so I'm alone in this elevator. And I push the button to get on my floor, but the doors aren't closing, right away. And so, that button that says close door? So I hit that. Keep pushing that, I don't think that button's hooked up to anything. I think it's just there to make you feel like you can do something to speed things up, But when we actually can slow down and take a breath and maybe take, just a minute or two mini vacation in the middle of your day, life feels better, and decisions are wiser, And when you slow down your decision-making process, it also gives you an opportunity to consider the big picture, right? Esau wasn't looking at the big picture. All he cared about, and all he could see was this bowl of soup, right? How many times in the Bible do you see the phrase, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Or sometimes just the God of Jacob. It might have been, it should have been, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau, right? But Esau, he couldn't see it. He couldn't see it. He was just so focused on living for the moments. There's a saying that's attributed to Albert Einstein that goes like this: not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. Not everything counts that can be counted. Not everything that can be counted counts. That's true, isn't it? And so the question becomes, well, what really counts? Even just subjectively, what really counts? What's really important to you? What do you consider really valuable? And unless, it's soup, asking that question, what's really important, what really counts for me, will spare you from trading whatever that is for soup, right? Again, consider the big picture. And part of considering the big picture is thinking about the consequences, right? The consequences. I bet that bowl of soup tasted really, really good. I bet it hit the spot. I bet it satisfied Esau, But then the bill came due, right? Every week, we hear about people, famous people and not famous people, who lose all their money, or they lose their job, they lose their family, lose their reputation. And sometimes they lose their lives because of decisions they made where they weren't really thinking about the consequences, right? Well, at this point, if I were, one of them really, really smart preachers, I'd probably contrast, let's contrast Esau and his brother Jacob. But I'm not a really smart preacher, and I don't really like Jacob. I've already told you that. I think Jacob's a shady character. So I want to contrast Esau instead with Jacob's young son, Joseph, and something that we see in Joseph's life in chapter 39 of Genesis. And some of you know Joseph's story. He's Jacob's favorite son, which is, by the way, shows another bit of Jacob's kind of poor character there. I mean, when you play obvious favorites like this, that's a recipe for disaster. For Joseph, it seems like as a young guy, it kind of gave him a little bit of an entitlement streak, and it certainly led to him being hated by his 10 older brothers. And so one day, the older brother's just about 17 years old, and they decide they're going to throw him in an empty water tank into a cistern. And the first plan is just they're going to leave him there to die. But then they, in a generous gesture, decide, no, we'll just sell him to slavery instead. Make a little money off this guy. And so they do that. They sell him into slavery. He ends up being sold to a prominent Egyptian military guy named Potiphar, but it turns out to be a really, really good gig for Joseph, and it benefits Potiphar as well. Here's some of what it says in Genesis 39, verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household and entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in his house and in the field. So Joseph, he's doing well, right? He's blessed. And with great blessing, though, and success, often come great challenges. We actually saw this a bit last week with Isaac, right? Somebody asked the CEO of a company that was really rapidly growing, he said, what can you expect when your company just really takes off like that? And his response, I think, is really applicable not just to CEOs, not just to organizational leaders, but to anybody who begins to experience a good measure of success in whatever is important to you. I mean, your career, your hobby, whatever it might be. He said this. He said, expect temptation like you've never experienced before. Expect temptation like you've never experienced before. And he didn't elaborate, but we could probably fill in the blank with whatever would be a strong temptation for us. Well, for Joseph, the temptation came in the form of Potiphar's wife. Here's what it says. Now Joseph was well-built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. Come to bed with me. This is like a soap opera script, isn't it? I mean, it's something here. And Potiphar, he's a pretty wealthy and powerful guy too, and so he would have had his pick of all the beautiful women in Egypt as well. And Joseph at this point, he's probably 18, 20 years old, and here's this lovely lady saying, come to bed with me. And it wasn't just a one-time thing either. It seems like this happened over and over again. It says, and though she spoke to Joseph day after day, right? Day after day, he refused to go with her. So this is happening over and over again. And unlike with Jacob, with Esau, she doesn't tell him what it's going to cost. Seems like a no-strings-attached offer, right? It's made again and again and again. But Joseph refused to go to bed with her, even be with her. I think he just wanted to watch the Pirates game on TV. That's why. That's what was going on. Yeah. Well, maybe he had a little more resolve than that. Okay. But then there came a day when his no wasn't good enough. His no wouldn't just cut it, because it says this: one day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me!" Exclamation point. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. And that's a good illustration of what James in his letter commends in the face of temptation. He says, don't just say no. Run. Run. Flee. Get out of there. All right, well, if Esau shows us some of what not to do, here's a little bit of what I glean from Joseph positively about making decisions, especially in tense and tempting situations. One thing I learned is what that eminent biblical theologian Clint Eastwood once said. He said, a man's got to know his limitations. Man's got to know his limitations, setting some limits. And look at how Joseph actually, how he does this. He says, no one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you. That's his limit. Except you, because you are his wife. Joseph had a great position. He had a lot of freedom. He could do whatever he wanted in that house. He had responsibility and privilege of handling all of Potiphar's stuff. He had a lot of freedom in there, a lot of responsibility, freedom, a lot of perks. But except you. There was a limit to that, right? Except his wife. And again, amidst all the choices that we have and the freedom that we have to make those choices, right? Always have some clear and firm limits. You're going to a party and you know that, hey, things might get a little out of hand here. have you set some limits before you even walk in the door of what you're going to do, right? Or you get offered a job, and it's a great opportunity, but are you really willing to work whatever hours they want? Do you have any non-negotiables that, things that you're not going to do for the sake of the job? If that's the case, it's good to know that going in. It's good to say that going in, right? Again, amidst all the decisions we have to make, have a clear idea of what the parameters, what the limitations are. But the most important thing that I learn here from Joseph about making good decisions is the importance of having made a prior decision to be walking with God, right? To be walking with God. And this isn't just for big decisions we have to make in tense moments, right? In fact, the way we train ourselves for those big decisions is by the little decisions that we make every single day. Every day we're presented with opportunities to do things like trade our integrity in being honest for just telling someone what we think they want to hear, Or trade giving of ourselves to help somebody for just being apathetic or lazy, Or to trade that encouraging word that we could say for the sarcastic quip that's on the tip of our tongue, And it's by consistently honoring God with these little everyday decisions that actually makes it not very hard when Potiphar's wife or whatever equivalent in your life for her comes around, right? Notice what Joseph says here. He says, how can I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And sin against God. See, it's not just, if your husband finds out about this, he'll be really mad. It's not, but I'd miss the Pirates game tonight if I went to bed with you. It's not any of that. No. If Joseph's biggest concern had been Potiphar, right, his decision here would have boiled down to basically, okay, which of two people do I want to make happy? Potiphar or his wife? Potiphar, who's not even here, or this woman who's not even dressed, And oftentimes we do make our decisions based on trying to please other people or to please ourselves, and a lot of the time that's okay. A lot of the time that's fine. That's not a bad thing. But sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. But you see, long before Joseph had ever met Potiphar or ever met his wife, he had made a decision to please God with all of his decisions. Now, some of you will know the reward that he got for that, right? Remember the reward he got? Thrown in prison, yeah. Got thrown in prison for 2 years. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you do the right thing and you get smashed, right? That happens sometimes. But in the long run, for Joseph, he eventually, God gave him more wealth and more authority and power than he'd had before. And God also raised him up to become the one through whom God was going to deliver his whole family, that remnant of God's people during a time of famine. You see, if we could forecast the future, we would never make that trade like Esau, trading a treasure for something like soup, right? We'd never do that. If we could catch our breath long enough to pray, to think through the trade-offs we're presented all the time, those little tugs, those subtle temptations, we'd make wiser choices and holier choices. We would. If we could see that terrible price that we'd eventually pay for, those sinful choices, right? If we could see the price we'd pay, we would, like Joseph, we would run and not look back. One last thing here, and that is, when is it that Joseph made that choice that pleasing God was what was really important to him? The Bible doesn't tell us, but I wonder if it didn't come about just over time as he hung around the tents with his family, as they were worshiping God, worshiping Yahweh, and just pondering as they did that, who is this Yahweh, and what's he about anyway? You ever wonder what sitting in a worship service like this has to do with the other 6 days, the other 167 hours that you have in a week, right? Well, hopefully hopefully moments like these are times when we get together, not just to sing some songs and listen to some, blowhard like me, okay? But to actually listen to God, and to not be in a hurry, to slow down, to really ponder just who is this God? What's really important in life? What's really valuable? And how it's not soup, And to consider how decisions that we make today in places like this relate to our lives outside these doors and in the long run. And in the midst of all this pondering, all this considering that we get to do in settings like this, friends, maybe the sitting in a service like this also becomes the occasion to decide and to redecide that the best decision we can ever make is that decision to walk with God, to be seeking to be honoring and pleasing Him in all that we think and say and do. Well, let's pray. Gracious God, we need your wisdom for specific decisions that you call us to make, and we ask for that. And Lord, your word says that if anyone lacks wisdom, that he can ask, and you who give generously will give it. And so we do. We ask you for that. But Lord, we pray that undergirding all of the decisions, large and small, that we make would be a firm decision, a decision that we can reaffirm even now and today and in this moment, to be seeking to walk with you in all things. We ask all this with thanksgiving in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen. If you're able, friends,